Colonel James C. Harding is one of the most decorated military heroes in American history, ranked 25th among all U.S. service members for valor and achievement. A command pilot with nearly 5,000 hours of military single-engine flight time, a master parachutist with 69 jumps, Colonel Harding's legacy was forged in the skies over Vietnam and strengthened through years of unwavering service. During the Vietnam War, Colonel Harding flew an extraordinary 596 combat missions, including 139 over North Vietnam, all in propeller-driven aircraft. As commander of the legendary 1st Special Operations Squadron, the Hobos, he led daring A-1 Skyraider missions from Nakhon Phanom, Thailand in support of combat search and rescue operations. His leadership under fire saved countless lives. In 1972, while directing a rescue mission, Colonel Harding was shot down by a Soviet-made SA-7 surface-to-air missile. Despite intense enemy presence, he evaded capture and killed 3 enemy combatants, used his survival radio to coordinate the rescue of his downed wingman, and was ultimately rescued himself by U.S. Army helicopters. His actions that day embody the courage and determination of American airmen. This is his story in his own words.
It's our job to provide the protection for the Jolly Green Giants, and to do it we use this A-1. Our job's pretty exciting, but it's also pretty dangerous. We protect the helicopter while he's in the very vulnerable position of hovering over the survivor. If somebody starts shooting, we immediately start shooting back.
We could start with, how did you get into aviation and how did you wind up in Vietnam?
Well, to start, I'm a farmer first. Grew up on a dairy farm and had never seen an airplane until I actually got into college. And of course, I had to take ROTC or I would be eligible for the draft. First 2 years, freshman, sophomore year. And then I had a decision to make before I got into my junior year of whether I wanted to continue with ROTC. If I didn't, then I would be 1A on the draft because I was in good shape. I was at Penn State on a football scholarship, so I was obviously in good shape to go fight a war. Anyhow, my major in college was animal husbandry because I wanted to get out of milking cows all the time to working with cows, but working with beef cattle, which was what I thought I would do. But as it turned out, as I went to summer camp for ROTC, I got to fly in an aircraft. First time I'd ever seen an airplane, a real airplane. The first time for sure I'd ever been in one. So I kind of liked that, and we decided when I got ready to graduate, I decided, okay, well, do I really want to go into the Air Force? I was offered a regular commission. I happened to be we had 2 wings at Penn State. We had wing freshmen and wing of sophomores, and then the juniors and seniors were the officers. So we had about 3,000 cadets, Air Force cadets, and I was the commander of all the cadets. I had selected me as a commander. So they offered me a regular commission. I said, I don't think I want to do that because I might not like it. I was also offered a job with one of the companies that makes machinery for farms. I was also offered a job as a lineman for the Los Angeles Rams, but I decided I would rather try flying an airplane. So I did.
What year was that?
This was 1956 when I graduated. That's when they were still the Los Angeles Rams. But anyhow, I went in and went through pilot training at first that started at Marana Air Base, primary pilot training, and then to Laredo for the basic pilot training. And from there went to Moody Air Force Base, where I ended up as an instructor, a T-33 instructor, but also checking out an F-86, which is air-to-air F-86D. Later on became the F-86L. Those aircraft we had there were the F-89 and the F-94, which were at that time our prime interceptors, air defense interceptors. So from there I went to, decided that I would continue to play football there at Moody, But then they offered me a job at Lackland. A guy called me, the 2-star journalist, said, "You should come play here at Lackland." I said, "Well, okay, but what else can I do?" He says, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I'd like to be a commander." So he made me a squadron commander. Well, while there, we had an opportunity to organize a little flying demonstration team, T-33s. Some of us pilots, we flew that. So further along in my career, finally got stationed a couple different places, ended up down at MacDill Air Force Base, and we were flying, at that point, we were flying over Cuba, loaded up with napalm to bomb Cuba if what they were working on, stopping the import of other materials, war materials into Cuba. Well, finally, they were able to stop that. I flew four combat missions down there in the F-84 before they finally turned their ships back around, and we got back out of that. So from there,
how close do you think we were to nuclear war at that time with the Cuban
I don't
Missile
think
Crisis?
we're as close to nuclear war as we were to actually having to fight it out with Cuba. Not only were we flying down there, but we were also helping train other aircraft from other countries to do the same thing. I can't remember all of the countries, but there were countries in
They were kind of like the Axis, but it was the communist bloc countries. I remember that. I can't remember the term, but there was a...
Yeah, but of course, the only one that was really communist inspired was Cuba, because the others had not gotten to that point yet. We're still fighting the drug wars in those other countries, but they were actually training pilots. They were training Cuban pilots in other countries, and I can't remember the countries. But not only were we ready to do what we had to do, but so were these others from other countries. I think it was may have been Venezuela was one. I'm not sure what the other country was. But anyhow, we were able to stop that, but that was my first taste of combat. So from there, a couple of assignments, and I ended up over in Okinawa. In 1963, I went over to Okinawa as a plans officer. We were writing plans for the defense of the Pacific against China and against Russia as well. So as a plans officer, obviously I had a pretty high clearance because we were writing what we call the SIOP, Single Integrated Operations Plan, for all of the Pacific area. So our position there on Okinawa was to essentially write those plans. And the only things we had going were the F-105s. We had three squadrons of F-105s on Okinawa, and they were actually flying over toward China, and those were the people who would have had to go to war with us if we saw it. They would have been the first actual combat aircraft there. Well, at that time, we were also training the Vietnamese, South Vietnamese. So about a year after I got there, I got checked out to fly the A-1, which was kind of a strange thing for me because when I first went to Vietnam in 1964 from Okinawa, I was a ground fac. I went in with the 173rd Airborne Brigade, which was the first American unit to go in there. Now, we were already working with the Vietnamese, South Vietnamese, as trainers for them to fly at that point, the AT-37 and the AT-28. They didn't get the A-1s until later on at that point. So the first time I got to actually fly in one of those, I flew with Tom Dwelly because I was a ground fac forward air controller, and I wanted to see what they were seeing from up top. I had a big Jeep with all kinds of radios on it, 4 different kinds of radios, AM, FM, single sideband, and UHF. But I couldn't see anything. We're in the jungle. It's before they actually started doing really heavy bombing. Vietnam is a really jungled place. You just can't see out at all. So I got up with Tom, and that said, okay, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So I asked if they had a kind of an aircraft that we could fly over the top of them. Well, the Army had the L-19, and so I asked if we could somehow get those. We found out, because we had forward air controller training in PACAF, which was on Hawaii. They had ATTACK, which was in Virginia. And then we had what we had over there, ours. Well, they're all different because we did what we had to make things work. So I talked them into let me fly the L-19. Before we became the A-1, we had a guy there that was flying those for the Vietnamese. And we didn't have a -1 for it. The -1 is what we use to tell us how to operate all the systems and so on. We were still flying it as an L-19. Well, I'd never flown a tail dragger at that point. I checked out in the T-34 and the T-28, which
so
are both
was trike gear.
tricycle gear, yeah.
Yeah.
So we went up to fly in this L-19, and of course this was one where they had a front and back. Well, the back, you can take the stick out and stow it, because usually what you have back there is an observer, a Vietnamese observer. The guy up front is an American. But you always had to have a Vietnamese guy with you because we couldn't put strikes in by ourselves. So we're up, been flying for about 45 minutes or so, and I happened to look around behind me, and he hadn't even unstowed his stick. Here he is allowing me to make landings in a tail dragger, and I've never flown a tail dragger before. So that was kind of an interesting.
So that was Tom Dwelly that allowed you to do that?
No, that was another guy. It was an old guy who was over there working with the Vietnamese. Tom was in his A-1. I went up with him. Anyhow, a couple of things interesting. One is we went in, we're practicing landing, this one thing, and all of a sudden I see the sparkles. I said, what's that sparkle over there? Because remember now, I've never been in actual combat before. He says, oh, they're shooting at us. We better get out of here. And we had been landed on this little strip out in the jungle someplace. Anyhow, we got checked out, and after about, I stayed with 173rd, that time about 8 months. We're learning a little bit about how to conduct operations, because I'm working with the brigade commander. I'm their air liaison, forward air controller, and I had two guys with me, a radio operator, a radio maintenance guy. And we were able to do quite a bit for them. We went everywhere, all the different ground operations they would go on. We would go on out with them, the three of us.
So you actually took forward air controller into the air in your time versus being on the ground with the ground troops like they were in World War II?
We had not ever done it from the air before.
Okay.
We had always been on the ground. And they had, it's a Mark 108, what they call it, it's the Jeep. It had, I say, the 4 radios on it. We couldn't take that with us, excuse me, on those operations, because it was just, they would take us out in a helicopter and drop us off. The whole, whoever was going out, 4 or 5 helicopters. And we'd be out for a week, 3 weeks, 2 months. We had everything, whatever we had with us. And they would resupply us every once in a while. With the 173rd, we also had the 1st Battalion Royal Australian Regiment with us. Now, they had been fighting in Borneo before. The 173rd had never seen combat. So this was a new thing for them, but by having the Australians with them, they were pretty efficient, but they were also green, and they were having a lot of problems. And that's why they needed our help, forward air controller help, because they would run into situations where they were outside of artillery range, the 173rd's artillery, so they would have to have help from that.
And the Vietnamese at this point had been fighting since before World War II, hadn't they?
They had been fighting, but actually World War II is what divided Vietnam into 2 pieces.
Okay.
At the peace conference, they said, okay, you up north, you can do what you want to do, the South's doing what they want to do. They were supposed to eventually get back together and be one nation again, but they never wanted to do that because the communists controlled not only North Vietnam, they also called the Khmer Rouge. Now, so both Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam are all divided into communists versus non-communists. And it kept getting worse and worse. Instead of getting together, they just kept getting worse and worse. So our job was to essentially help the Vietnamese can take care of themselves. But at that point, they started getting the Viet Cong being trained by the North Vietnamese. They would take them to North Vietnam, train them, and bring them back down to South Vietnam. And they were creating havoc. And that was what our main job was with the 173rd, is to essentially fight the Viet Cong. We were not, at that point, fighting the North Vietnamese. That was more up in the north. We were in 3 Corps, which was this 1, 2, and 3, and 4. 4 Corps was down what they call the Delta. 3 Corps was kind of in the middle, but we had the mountains and jungle, a lot of jungle. And then 1 and 2 Corps were up north, closer to Vietnam, North Vietnam, and Laos. So going back to
1963.
This is 64.
64.
This is 64.
And the 173rd, if I'm not mistaken, got hit really hard. I think it was 65, 66, wasn't it?
65 and 66. The 173rd stayed there for, well, essentially throughout the war.
Yeah.
They were the main unit that was there. Now, I was only with them for the first 2 years, 64 and 65. So during that time, we were very successful because we would go out on search and destroy operations, stay out, like I say, from a week to a couple of months. And we'd essentially do what we had to do, which was find the Viet Cong and destroy them. So going back to the A-1, what happened is because it was all the nomenclature that we used for flying was in Army lease, so to speak, we decided we needed to get it upgraded to be used for the Air Force. So I went back to Cessna and wrote the -1, with Cessna's help, wrote the -1 for the A-1, which put it into Air Force language so we could better understand it. And at the same time, I said, we got something that's got a little bit more power, so they introduced me to the 337A, which was eventually going to become the O2. It was a pusher-puller engine on that. So that was the first time we were introduced to a better aircraft to use for forward air controlling. So I came back, and by that time I was going back and forth from Okinawa because I was coming into Vietnam TDY, temporary duty. So I didn't stay there for most of the time, more than 5 or 6 months. Well, what happened is we needed to have an Air Force version of the training manual for the aircraft. So they sent me back to Cessna in Wichita Falls, Kansas, to write the -1 for the A-1, which we did. And while I was there, I was able to talk to the tech reps that were there and ask if they had an aircraft that was better. So we went up and flew in the what was become the O2, 337A. We had 3 tech reps in there and myself. And we were shooting touch-and-go landings. I said, well, this is perfect. This is a great aircraft for us because we need something like this. Pusher-puller engines, which gave it a lot more versatility than the O-1 had. The O-1 was a great aircraft, and you almost fly it like you didn't have to worry about flying it. Anyhow, by the time we got the O-2, they had installed the Air Force radios, which are hundreds of pounds. They had put armor plating in certain places under the seat and the sides, and it was not nearly the capable aircraft that we had flown at Cessna. But they did change it to a 2-person, instead of a 4-person aircraft, it was changed to 2-person aircraft, so it helped that somewhat. But anyhow, it became our second forward air control aircraft. So going back with the 173rd, after I'd gone back and forth several times, we started off, by the way, in tents outside of Benoit Air Base. We started off in tents on the ground. And once I went back the second time, And they were in tents again, but they had a wooden floor under the tents instead of on the ground. So I went back and came back the third time. They were in tents still, but they had concrete floors under the tents. So they were making headway. We're still doing the same job as we were doing before. And by that time, they needed someone to be the standard valve sanitization evaluation instructor. So they made me the PACAF standard valve, what we call CFE, standard valve. I can't think of what it stands for now. But anyhow, I was in charge of doing that. That's why I went back and forth to Vietnam so many times, because I would go down every once in a while to fly with all the different units. And then I would write up information and send it to all the units. Different pilots would have that information that I would gain by listening. Okay, this group does it this way, this group does it that way. But I would combine those together and then publish information that would send out to all the units. So after, I think, about a year and a half, almost 2 years, they decided to send me with the ROK Capital Division, the Republic of Korea. These were a group of Koreans taken from all the different units in Korea to make one big unit. And those were the guys who were there. So I worked with them for about almost a year with an interpreter, because most of them did not speak English. So that was always interesting. And then during that time, I actually went back to Korea in the middle of the winter with my summer flight suit, right up on the DM, the military zone, to brief them about how to use the forward air controller, work with them. So I briefed F-86 pilots. I think there were probably about 300 of them there, through an interpreter. So I got to do a lot of different things then. And I worked with the next unit that came in was what we call the Big Red 1, which was in a unit, an area very close to where we were before. And there, again, we were doing pretty much the same kind of thing, search and destroy missions, but we were doing it in a different area. We're up in a little bit farther into 3 Corps, into 2 Corps, which was a little bit further up north. They were in a little bit what's called a Like rubber plantation. There we were able to go out after the B-52s had bombed, and we would actually put our units from the Big Red 1 in and cover the areas that had been bombed with the B-52s, so we would be able to find what damage they had done, look through some of the tunnels. We had a lot of tunnel rats in the Big Red 1. They were little guys that would actually go down in the tunnels and see what damage had been done and if there were any of these folks still there. So after that, I worked with the what we call the AT-28s out of Nakhon Phanom. Again, TDY up there, flew with them, and what we would do is we would fly at night with starlight scopes, which everything's green when you look at it through it, but you can see what's going on. We find trucks drop what we call a log flare, which is a great big old chunk of flare, and it would be on the ground. They could see that, which gave them an aim point. They would come in, drop their parachute flares, and they would bomb under those parachute flares.
Who would come in and bomb? Was that the A-1s, or who was flying?
Those were the AT-28s that were flown by the
South Vietnamese or the Laotians?
Some of the Laotians, but some of them also from Thailand, the Thai pilots. Those were the main ones, but the Laotian pilots also flew the same aircraft.
And that was in Laos, where you would be seeing them?
It would be mostly in Laos, and part of it in 2 Corps as well, but most of it was in Laos at that point. That's when we weren't actually in Laos.
People understand that Laos was supposedly a neutral country, and
it's forbidden
for us to be there. But they don't understand what happened with the Geneva Accords of, I think it was 63, 64?
64, I believe, I think.
Where we'd agreed with the communists that everybody would pull out of Laos and it would be a neutral country. But when we pulled out, I think we had, 8 80,000 troops there?
We had quite a few troops there, but this was almost, I think that might have been a little bit before that, because see, we were flying out of Nakhon Phanom. I was flying out of Nakhon Phanom. That's when they didn't have a runway. They just had Pier Stillingman's planking. So I was flying out of there, but I was FACing Laotian and Thai pilots.
Gotcha.
So we weren't actually flying. And we had different kinds of troop carriers in there. We had a C-47, the EC-47, which was
The electric goon, yeah.
Yeah. And had not gotten the AC-47 yet. But that would come very shortly after that. I think the last time I was there, the next time I went over was in '67, and I flew out of Dong Ha, which is on the border with North Vietnam. And we flew, that's when I flew all the missions up into North Vietnam. Our job there was, as a forward air controller, to find targets, and then mostly either 105s or some F-100s would go up there.
Which group were you flying with up there?
I was flying with just myself and my one other guy that was maintaining the A-1 for us.
So you weren't with like the Raven Facts up there?
No, I wasn't. That's before we had Raven Facts.
Okay, I gotcha.
This was, like I say, was in '67.
Okay.
And those were, like I say, we would fly missions up into North Vietnam, identify targets, and sometimes we would fac in South Vietnamese pilots, but they always had an American pilot with them. So in other words, it'd be a flight of four, either one of the aircraft or in one of the aircraft would be an American advisor. And that was always sporty because they didn't speak very much English, and of course we didn't speak hardly any Vietnamese, just a few words here and there. So that was my last flight there with the in combat. I flew 450 missions in the A-1 combat missions over there.
How often did you take fire in the
Almost all the time, especially when we were in South Vietnam. And of course,
in North Vietnam?
when we went in North Vietnam, the worst one was we would take some fire, but usually we didn't see, because we would try to stay away from areas where we thought there was fire. One time we did have problems, and we always flew in pairs in North Vietnam because we wanted to make sure somebody got back with information. And I was checking out a new person who's going to be a forward air controller with the Vietnamese, a lieutenant colonel. At that point, I was still a captain. My first comment was a captain. As we were looking at this one missile site, we were going to put a strike of 105s on. They fired a missile, SA-2 missile, and hit my wingman, which of course obliterated him. It's like somebody put a firecracker off on a bird. The wings just kind of drooped down and he just fell out of the sky. And about that time, I was starting to circle around to cover him, and they fired another SA-2 at me, which just as they fired it, I turned over and went straight down. Missile went over the top of me, and the I think it was an EC-130, or it may have been a 121, EC-121, but anyhow, it was one of the aircraft were up there directing all the strikes. He said, "What are you doing down there?" A missile just went by us. And I said, "Well, I'm capping this guy." He says, "Well, you're going to have to get out of there." He says, "Get out right now." So we did, got out. And we lost that guy, obviously. So I think that was probably pretty close to the last of my missions, because I did fly actually 101 missions over in the A-1. So I went back to the States and taught squadron officer school for 3 years, went to Air Command and Staff College, and said, I got to get back over there. So A-1 assignment came up, went to a class, went over there in the A-1.
What did you think of the A-1 when you got in that? I know it's a tail dragger, but it's a big tail dragger.
It's a big tail dragger. It's a lot of aircraft. It's almost, when you first start flying, it's almost like it's clumsy, because I'd flown the F-86 and the F-84, and they were pretty agile aircraft. The 84 was underpowered, but it was still a jet, and it still flew like a jet. Well, the A-1 was almost like an O-1. It was very, very maneuverable, but it was also a heavy aircraft, especially since we had so much on it. And of course, we went through training at Hurlburt. We were dropping iron bombs that we were simulating, regular bombs. I was able to do well enough there, everything I needed to do. So I was very happy to get back into Vietnam again.
What year was this when you transitioned back with the A-1s?
This was 1971.
That's when everything was really heating up.
It was. It's when we were starting to pull some of our ground troops out. So now it became more of a stop the flow of traffic coming down from north. Before that, the A-1 had been like another fighter that they were using in South Vietnam. And by the way, one of the other things I did, which I thought was really interesting, was to forward air control Navy bombardment coming from the battleships. These were these big 16-inch guns, and when that missile, it wasn't a missile, it was an artillery shell, it was about the size of a Volkswagen. And if you missed with the first one, once you gave them the correction, every other one would be right on target. It was a wonderful way of destroying enemy targets over there. So back to the A-1. When I got there, of course, the wing commander, his name was Jack Robinson, and he was a World War II pilot. We had a great relationship. I was but at that point, I was a major. I was on the lieutenant colonel list, but I hadn't gotten promoted yet. So they kept sending lieutenant colonels into the first squadron, Special Operations Squadron. But he had decided at that point that he was going to eventually make me a squadron commander. So they kept putting these lieutenant colonels into other positions in the wing. Anyhow, as the operations officer, it was my job to essentially get all the flights scheduled, get the training for the new people coming into the unit up to speed. And of course, one of my additional duties was to what we call not orientation flights, but flights for aircraft that had been written up for something that was serious, make sure it is ready to go again. So I flew a lot of missions. There was no question about that. I flew a lot of missions, and a lot of those missions were search and rescue, although we did fly regular strike missions as well, especially strike missions to support someone who had been shot down or some group that had been ambushed someplace. Remember now, we were pulling a lot of the Americans out, so they didn't have a lot of their own firepower with them anymore. We were depending more on the Vietnamese to provide them with what they needed. Most of the strike missions that were being flown into North Vietnam to stop the flow of supplies coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail from North Vietnam.
There was a point when Johnson had the bombing halt.
There were several of those, yes.
And that was a point where the North Vietnamese just pushed more and more and more down the trail, which caused a lot of this. And then we were trying to get out of the war at the same time.
Exactly.
Which became overwhelming. And they had already built up many, many forces down south, had they not, at that time?
Not only down south, but in Laos and Cambodia. Yeah. And this is where the problem lay. That's one of the main jobs as a forward air controller, was to find this infiltration coming down. Find what we called the river crossings. What they would do is they would put stones in the river and they could drive their carts or trucks or bicycles, whatever, across on those stones. You couldn't tell it was not part of the river, except in an O-1, because we were flying low and slow, we could actually see the difference in the way the water would go past. Okay, they've got a crossing there. And we would actually put strikes in on those. One of the problems you faced, though, is they had a very nasty habit of stringing cables across these streams or rivers. And if you flew into that with an O-1, it would obviously wreck your day. It'd be regular cable. That and the fact that we would find trails coming down out of Laos into South Vietnam, and we would identify those, we'd put strikes on, destroy the trails. During the night, they would have thousands of workers come in with picks and shovels, and they would actually repair that place we had destroyed on there. So it was a constant thing of identifying what they had rebuilt and getting strikes back on it again. During that time, that's when we used the acoustic and seismic sensors we dropped from different aircraft, fighter aircraft. We dropped some from our forward aero control aircraft. And those, what we did was the seismic ones would identify sound on the ground.
Is that the one they said what they would seed with gravel? It was smaller pieces that they would just fly. Is that the seismic one, or was that the one that was shaped like the trees that was kind of like a sonar buoy?
Well, the two of them they had. One of them was, like I say, was acoustic, and those were the ones that it didn't look sort of like a tree. In other words, you could actually hear them trying to knock them out of the trees. Mm-hmm. You could hear it. We had this Task Force Alpha there at Nakhon Phanom, and they would get that information relayed to them through the QU-22, which is a real small propeller aircraft. But our job was to go out and check those places, see what it was there. Based on that information we would get from Task Force Alpha, we could go out and look and find those places.
Did you get your information fairly quickly from Task Force Alpha? Because
yes.
I know you take Robin Olds and his fighter wing that was up north. I know he sent people down to the Nakhon Phanom trying to figure out how are you getting your information so quickly compared to what he was getting. His stuff would go back to DC and it would come back weeks later, and his information was old by that point. So I was wondering if you had a direct line with Task Force.
They were right on the base with us. TFA was on Nakhon Phanom.
That was top secret. I mean,
it was.
It was like Star Wars at its time.
It really was, because we could fly over the area where those were, and they would tell us, okay, we hear this. Trucks are going here. They could hear the trucks, hear the engines in the trucks. We would go over and identify them. We'd do this in the evening or at night. And then we would put strikes in on that based on that information we got from Task Force Alpha. We got it the same day. The QU-22 actually flew at the same time we did. They're flying up around 25,000 feet, which is, they're on oxygen because that's not a pressurized aircraft. It's just a little airplane. Anyhow, we would use that information to look for these crossings and so on. And the acoustic ones were, like I say, the ones that look like trees, but the seismic ones were ones that were embedded in the ground. And as the trucks came over, they would pick up that sound. They were able to identify what it was, whether it was a truck or a bicycle or what it was. TFA, they had
troops moving, yeah.
Anyhow, so that was part of it. But then, like I say, going back to when I got back over there, then our task for most part was rescue. We were down to 28 aircraft. That's all we had, 28 A-1s. When I got to the squadron, we had 28. We had lost that many A-1s, or given that many back to the Vietnamese that they used. So at that point, we pulled all the A-1s to one place at Nakhon Phanom. So when I got there, we had all the A-1s at one place. We still would take a couple of them, send them up to Da Nang or down to one of the other bases for a couple of days, just to be there if they were having a strike at that point. But mostly everything was there. So our job was training. And the people the people we were getting, other than the lieutenant colonels, were all lieutenants. And that's why we had so many lieutenants flying, but they were excellent pilots. They all had come out of training command. Most of them had been first assignment instructor pilots, FAPEs, what we call FAPEs. So they were exceptionally good pilots, but they were totally unfamiliar with striking. So that was my job at that point, is to get those guys up to speed so that we could make them capable of taking over a mission if we were in search and rescue. Our other mission, of course, was strike, and we did quite a bit of strike in support of the Vietnamese because they didn't have the Army with them, our U.S. Army with them. So a lot of the strikes we had were in support of the Vietnamese. Again, they didn't have enough of their own folks, pilots and machines, to cover everything, because we're talking a big area over there. We were into working with the Laotians to support them when they would send their troops out places. I got to know General Vang Pao very well because he was the guiding force for the Laotians in all the operations that they did. In fact, I spent one night at their camp. I flew out with Air America and went into his camp. I have no idea where it was. I don't know what we ate. I don't know what we drank, because it was all back in the jungle someplace. But we supported them, and we also supported what we called the heavy hook. They were right across the street from us, and we would support them. We had two kind of helicopters there. We had the HH-53 and the CH-53. The CH-53 was a cargo aircraft. It didn't have the refueling capability. It may have had refueling, I can't remember. Anyhow, it was cargo, not suitable for rescue. It didn't. I don't think it did not have the hoist on it. We would use that to infiltrate these heavy hook folks into North Vietnam. They would go into North Vietnam, no American identification whatsoever on them. We'd leave them there for a week, 2 weeks, whatever, and then we had to go back in and pull them back out again.
Was that part of these MACV-SOG heavy
Yes.
hook? So that was
just their nickname.
Yeah, one or two Americans with probably 5 or 6 indigenous, maybe 4 Americans. They'd have a small team that they would drop in, correct?
Okay. The ones we worked with were all Americans. Now, they would actually add some people with them. Sometimes it was the Laotians, sometimes Vietnamese.
Okay.
But we would leave them there on their own for quite a period of time, and then we would have to go back in and pull them back out again. So our job was to support Air America. If they had to go in emergency, go in and pick them out. Now, if we were using our CH-53s, then that was be an American operation. We usually had one of the CIA folks with us, not in our aircraft, but in the CH-53s when we were going to pull them out. So we got to know their operation pretty well, and we got to be pretty good friends with them because these were guys that had messed up someplace. And this was their last chance. Okay, you either go to prison or you go do this. But they were very good at what they were doing. So that was...
That takes a specific breed of man.
It does, indeed.
To go into an environment like that.
Yeah.
And
between that and the snipers, you got some people that are really dedicated, totally dedicated to their mission. Mm-hmm. It did that. So
let's see. Did you ever have to bail out? Ever? Have you ever been shot up bad enough where you had to bail out?
Well, I got shot down twice in Vietnam. The first time was up with our brigade commander, General Williamson. Before we got our own aircraft, I would go up with him once in a while and essentially identify targets, places that we're having problems. Because we would have our folks out on the ground, and sometimes instead of me going out with them, he would say, let's go out over the top. We would, And so we were out one day and we got shot down.
What were you flying then?
It was in a it was his command helicopter.
Okay.
It was UH-1, Huey. And immediately we auto-rotated down the ground. We set up a perimeter. Of course, there was a call went out, and it wasn't probably maybe a couple hours before they had another helicopter come out and pick us up again. But we went from being aviators to being troops.
I bet you that hour or two felt like
it was a long time because we were getting fired on. We were getting shot at. That's obviously we got shot down. Mm-hmm. I think it was a lucky shot that hit the rotor blades or something like that. Anyhow, and a couple of times we had some strange things happen. Once I had to go out with the Army on the ground because somebody had jettisoned their CBU, cluster bomb units, and they didn't know what they were. So I had to go out with the Army on the ground while we went out and scarfed those up, brought them back in again.
Because they were usable by
the enemy. Usable by the enemy, make booby traps with them.
Oh, yeah.
Their booby traps mostly consisted of punji sticks. They would take a place on a trail, and of course we would buy the trails a lot when we were going out. We had scouts out ahead of us all the time, so we very seldom saw those until after they'd been dismantled. But they would dig a pit and put these sharp bamboo stakes on the bottom of that, and if you broke through that onto those, you would be impaled on that. And it was a wound. What they tried to do is wound you so that somebody would have to take you back. So you didn't get rid of one, you got rid of 2 or 3 people to take them back. The 173rd, by the way, throughout that war, they were the go-to unit. They did more fighting probably than any other unit other than maybe the Marines. And that's the unit that was with us up at Dong Ha when we were on the demilitarized zone. Those were Marines up there as well. Mm-hmm. That was the second time I got wounded, and that was when the artillery from North Vietnam, 133s, came across.
So where were you wounded?
It broke my hand. I was coming back from flying over North Vietnam, and they were having a strike from North Vietnam.
So your second time you got shot down, what were you flying then?
I was flying the A-1. We were on a mission to rescue some folks up in Quy Nhon, which is Route Pack 1. I'm not Route Pack 1. South Vietnam divided into the things. It was Region 1.
Okay. Do you remember the people or the SAR that you were working there? Was it?
Yeah, it was an O2 pilot. Again, this was in 1972, and we had mostly just advisors in the South. There were, I think, 3 Army advisors and 3 or 4 Vietnamese officers. This O2 FAC had been working with them, trying to get them extracted, and he got shot down. This is the first time they used the SA-7. It was a tech rep team of Russians helping the Vietnamese, and they had been firing these. When I first heard about the getting shot down, I figured, okay, it was an SA-2 from north, because Quy Nhon's very close to the DMZ. Mm-hmm. And when he said he got shot down, because like I say, he was trying to coordinate the pickup of these 5 people, and he got shot down. So it's a strange situation because we already had 2 aircraft up there. Well, I sent one of them in to help out. He got shot down. I sent 2 more in to help out, and one of them got shot down, had to ditch into the ocean. So the next morning, Wingman and I went out to do the same thing. We'd been there about, I'd say maybe half an hour looking around what was going on. And we were staying as low as we could. Again, we thought it was the artillery from up north. And all of a sudden, I got an explosion, and the cowling and the prop came off the aircraft. It hit the engine area of the aircraft. It's a heat-seeking missile. It's about the size, I'd say maybe, I'm not sure, of course, I didn't see it, but as I understand it, it's about a 24 to 25 inch thing, but it's got a pretty good explosive head in it. And it, like I say, it blew off the cowling and blew off the prop.
Now, for people to understand the size of that prop, how long, tip to tip, is that prop?
It's about, again,
It's
I don't know.
16 feet or something like that?
It's taller than I am, let's put it that way.
Just one, and then you've got four.
Four blades on it.
I'm thinking I think it was 16 feet. They're massive.
We had one, when I was squadron commander, I would always go down, work with the maintenance guys at night, because they were always working on an airplane all night long to get them ready to go the next day. So we were doing carrier landings, and I remember I was doing a carrier landing, and I hit one of those props that had propped up there, and it fell over on me. It took 3 people to get it pulled off of me.
So once you got hit and the cowling and the prop came off, how long did it take you to get out? You knew you were in big trouble at that point.
I knew I was in big trouble, but I started trying to glide away from where I thought maybe the file. First thing was I thought it came from up north. And I thought, no, well, they were shooting at me from down below, because there were people down there. That's why this O2 pot was down there. So I started trying to turn to get away from there, and they fired another missile, which hit me in the back, and it froze my elevator, which meant I couldn't control up and down, so I was going straight down. Then I realized, okay, I'm going to have to eject. I was only at probably 1,200 feet, something like that, above the ground. So I didn't have a lot of time, but while I'm floating down, I can, the first thing I'm thinking about is, okay, I've got to get my pistol out. I can't do anything up here, so I'm going to get my knife out, so I'll fight them. Well, they're shooting at me in a parachute as I'm coming down. And I could see these guys down there, and I could see the flash of the rifle fire. So that's when I decided, okay, when I get in the ground, I'm going to have to clear this out. I had told my wingman ahead of time, Don Screws. I said, okay, you're going to have to get back out over the ocean if I get shot down, because we'd already lost 2 aircraft there. So I said, you have to get back over the ocean and help me get rescued. Well, as I get on the ground, I hear a bang, and I look up, and there he's coming down. He's got shot down also. So we actually lost 4 A-1s in that one rescue. Anyhow, as I get on the ground, I realize, okay, I've got to get this thing secure. So nobody's going to be able to come in here to pick me up if we don't get something done. So I was able to get rid of the three guys that were shooting at me.
Was it pistol?
Well, pistol for one, and then I had his AK-47. So I could use that.
So you picked up a weapon from one of the guys you took care of?
The first guy, yeah.
How close were they when they got into you?
I would say probably from here to that door, from where I was.
30 feet?
Yeah, that's my pistol shot. Because what I was laying down low, and I waited until he came out of his, because I could see the foxholes on the ground when I was flying over, because I'd been flying around over there. So anyhow, when he picked his head up, then I could get him pistol, and then I had his AK-47. By the way, they brought that AK-47 back to NKP. So one of the Army guys had gone in there after that. He brought it back, brought it into the hooch, and had the bayonet on it, and they stuck it in the floor, wooden floor there. He says, I thought you'd like to have this, but I couldn't bring it back to the United States. But anyhow, that was that rescue. What we did is we had UH-1, 2 of them come in, and when he started coming down to a hover, I don't know how high I was, but I know I jumped up into the helicopter. and this great big old guy was there in the back. He grabbed me and pulled me on into the helicopter. And then we went up, I could see where my wingman had gone down. We went over and picked him up, went back over to Queen Yan, and I told the guys, I said, now, if you're going to go back out there, this is what you have to be careful of. Whatever you do, if you start taking ground fire, don't go up. Go back up again because you're going to get up in the missile range. Well, I didn't realize what missile was getting, but anyhow, the helicopter picked me up, went back down. He had picked up the two the Vietnamese officers, and he got hit again, and it blew the helicopter out of the sky and killed all of them. The other wingman helicopter had picked up the Army advisors in the FAC, and he got hit. They auto-rotated down to the ground, and the two Cobras that were escorting them came down. They landed. The guys got on the skids of the Cobras, and they took them out on the skids.
So that's like 6 aircraft that went down, or
Yeah.
more? Wow.
It's like Bat 2-1.
Yeah.
Bat 2-1 was the same thing. That was the first one that I had got involved in. I was the search and rescue coordinator at NKP. So I was actually sending the aircraft in or doing the rescue on that one. That's when we stopped making rescues where the helicopter would go in without knowing for sure that it was safe. From that on, we didn't lose any helicopters because we made sure at that point, if we were going to send a helicopter in, we wanted to make sure that that area was secure enough where we could get in and get back out again.
Now, Bat 2-1, the North Vietnamese were making a major push coming down through.
Exactly. They had a whole brigade, I think, or more army, a whole army coming down. That's where we made the rescue of Hamilton was made not by us because we'd already lost our HH-53 and the whole crew. We lost 2 other helicopters down and 2 forward air controllers that were flying in O2s. Mm-hmm. We got one of them out, and we got one of the other guys out as well. But that's when Tommy Norris and the Vietnamese came down the river, disguised as...
They were the Green Beret, or no, the Navy SEALs.
They were Navy SEAL. It was Navy SEAL and an Army Ranger. The Kit Nguyen was the Army Ranger, Vietnamese Army Ranger that was with Tommy Norris. And Tommy was, of course, what do you call it? Green Beret.
No, he was Navy SEAL, wasn't he?
Navy SEAL, I'm
yes,
sorry.
He was Navy SEAL.
The Vietnamese was
the Ranger.
Like Ranger, yeah.
But they actually infiltrated up through the river. And
well, actually what they did is they came down the river and disguised as Vietnamese. They could actually see the North Vietnamese up on the bank, but they looked just like Vietnamese on a sampan. But they were able to get Hamilton to come down to the water, and they pulled him in and took him on out.
Wow.
Anyhow.
That was many days. And then you were also involved in the Oyster 01 Bravo.
Yeah, we had several. We had, there's one C-130, AC-130 got shot down. We picked up all 15 of those people. I picked up the last 2. What had happened is it had taken fire and gotten one of the engines. And anyhow, they had to bail out. Everybody bailed out.
AC-130 was a gunship, correct?
It was a gunship, AC-130 gunship.
Spectre?
Spectre.
Yes.
And it was in Laos. They had gotten hit, and they had bailed out everybody but the pilot. I think a pilot and co-pilot, I can't remember. It was just 2 people left in the aircraft because they'd gone and bailed them out. They were just, because they'd all gone out pretty close. And they were picking those. Matter of fact, Del Stovall was the one that was picking up some of those. But the last 2 hadn't bailed out yet until they finally got, then they bailed out. And those were the 2 that I was rescuing. Well, that was actually my first rescue with those 2 guys. And it happened to be a CIA helicopter that was picking them up. And those, like I say, those are the last two. That's the first time I ever got to fly a helicopter, by the way. 2 days later, they invited us down to the base, and I think it was Udorn or Ubon, I can't remember which base it was. We went down in a HH-53, and they all had a lot to drink. I didn't have anything to drink. So when we came back, it says, Hardin, you're going to have to fly the airplane. I said, I don't know how to fly a helicopter. Oh, that's no problem. All you do is just so-and-so. Until we got back to NKP, and I said, hey, guys, somebody's got to wake up because I can't land this thing.
I may be able to keep it in the air, but I don't know about this landing part of this thing.
Well, it's just, it's like, patting your head and rubbing your belly and then switching.
Yeah. I used to work for a helicopter company. The funniest thing I think we ever saw was people that came in fixed wings. They're used to flying down a runway to land, and the helicopter, you're coming in where you're looking is where you're going, so their feet would start coming up. Yeah. And you could see them curl up into a little ball. They were really unsure looking through that chin bubble. That was always funny to watch.
Yeah, anyhow, we survived it. I think that was the first rescue. Another one that was kind of interesting was, again, Oyster 01. But before that, we had another rescue. Clyde Smith was in a EC Navy aircraft. I can't name the nomenclature for it now, but he had a bombardier navigator, and he got hit with anti-aircraft fire. That's the same thing that shot down Hamilton and that group. It was anti-aircraft fire. That was an EB-66, I believe. EB-66 or EB-57, one of those two. Anyhow, that was their aircraft. But this was E6B, which is a single-engine aircraft. He got shot down. Anyhow, that rescue lasted for 5 days. And this is the first time that I can remember that we used that CS. It's a gas that made you vomit.
The riot gas.
Riot gas. And we had gone out there 3 days in a row to try to rescue him. First day out, when he went down, he and his backseater both went down. We had sent other aircraft. We went out shortly after we got there, after he got shot down, but it was still in the afternoon. It was getting close to dark. My wingman and I were circling around, and we finally got a guy to go over in it was a fastback. I think he was in a F4 fastback. He went down right over the top and popped up through the clouds. It was total cloud cover. So we were thinking about, okay, what we'll do is we'll come out over the top and then go down through the clouds. Well, I started going down through the clouds, left my wingman up on top. And when I finally got down right over the spot where the fastback had said he was on the ground, I broke out of the clouds, but I didn't realize that there were mountains on both sides of where I was. So when I actually broke out in the valley. So as I was circling around down there, we're starting taking ground fire. Well, this happened to be at the juncture of 4 main highways on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And he was right in the middle of that juncture, big north-south, and a couple and across here. It was just, you saw did I show the video there at Dayton? I don't think I did.
I don't think so.
Anyhow, the video is very impressive. The, what do you call it, television group. Anyhow, they recorded afterwards. Okay. In 1979. They recorded Clyde Smith and I talking about the rescue. And we had actually a photo of what it looked like on the ground. So he was in the middle of that and is surrounded by anti-aircraft artillery. So we had to we had to get rid of that AAA before we could make a rescue, because
The Vietnamese would let him sit there knowing that you were coming and they were looking to bring down more aircraft.
We had EC-47s that were recording Vietnamese talking about, let's leave them there, we'll set a trap, and when we come in to rescue, we'll shoot them all down. That's essentially what they were saying. So it took us 4 days with facts. These were OV-10 facts at this point, essentially eliminating all those anti-aircraft artillery pieces. There was anything from 23 millimeter all the way up to 57 millimeters. So as I'm going in to make the first time we got in, I got fire from both sides that went through both wings and right over the top of the canopy. So I realized that it was going to be difficult to get in and get him. And we told him, so we asked Clyde to move. And he did, he moved. He said he found a tree that had been uprooted and he got down underneath where the roots had been down there. But at one point he said he saw the guys looking for him. He actually see them looking down at him. He said either they were too scared to do anything or they didn't realize that was who they were looking for, but they went off. But that's when we dropped the gas on them. And he said, boy, he says, it gave me some really weird dreams. It was really, really crazy. But it scared them off as well. So we were actually able then to go in and make that. Was Dale Stovall's first big, he didn't actually make the rescue. He was a standby wingman. But he got up to, I think he said he got up to something like 14 or 15,000 feet, which is pretty high for a helicopter. But he was making sure he didn't get shot at. That was one rescue. Another one, of course, that I think was Oyster. And that one was one where Ron Smith and his wingman actually found Roger after he'd been on the ground for 20 days. Yeah. And we picked him up on the 21st day. And
that was the northernmost rescue
at that point. At that point, yeah, because it was way up by Lynn Yenbai Airfield.
He was above Hanoi.
Yeah, above Hanoi's over here and Yenbai's over here. Yeah. The closest I'd come to Hanoi before that was we were actually looking for somebody with my wingman, and as we were going round and around, we happened to look over, and I says, "Oh, look over there, what's that?" And he said, "I think that's Hanoi." I said, "I think we better get out of here." So out we went. We didn't find the guy we were looking for, by the way. But anyhow, that one was interesting because we were able to, even though Ron had taken some fire the day before, we were able to figure a path that we could go up outside of that area and then come back down from another angle after we crossed the river.
I believe, was that the Thud Ridge that the 105 pilots would take up, the route they would take to avoid the anti-aircraft that you guys went in on?
It wasn't Thud Ridge, but it's something similar. That when we went across, it was very low. There were very, very little hills there. It was, because what we did is we went up the river, crossed the river, came back down the other side. So Thud Ridge was down close to where Roger was on the ground.
Okay.
And on the way down, we crossed several villages. We took some fire on the way down because we were very low. There were four of us, 4 A-1s and 2 helicopters. So once we got fairly close, Ron went over by himself and identified Roger, made sure we were picking up the right guy. And then what they did is he and Buck Buchanan actually went in and did the rescue while we stayed back with the standby helicopter. Then when they came out, we went back down. Now, if we got shot at, we shot back. But as we crossed the river, Red River, on the way back down, we came across a train, and that train fired at us. Somebody on the train, it was some kind of...
This was an armored train. It wasn't just some...
I don't know what it was, but at least had a couple of cars on it that were armored. It was probably bringing parts and so on down to, because it was coming toward Hanoi. But anyhow, they fired at us. So we said, okay, we made one pass on the plane, dropped CBU on it, and then Ron with the helicopters went on, and God, that's faint, I can't think of his name now. He's passed away since then. But anyhow, he and I made another pass on, I circled back around and fired the engine. I fired rockets and bombs I had on there and blew up the engine. So as we're going back, joining back up with the helicopters, the guy in the back of the helicopter says, hey, there's a MiG coming, slowing down. So I turned into the MiG and fired at him with rockets and my guns. He turned around, went back. We went on down. They wanted us to land at where Roger was from, but Dale Stovall said, no, we've got some engine problems, so we're going to have to land at our base. So we landed. And of course, I forget the general's name that came out. God, my mind's slipping. Anyhow, he came to meet us when we landed there.
Yeah.
And
he was the one that they had to run the rescue up through, and I'm trying to remember his name as well, but it came down to the commitment that the Air Force had made to the men that if you went down, we would come get you. And it came down to that morale message.
Yeah. And that's what tipped it in our favor, because to be able to do it, because that's the first time. Now, we made a couple others. The Navy, of course, made some rescues over there, too, with their, I think they had the CH-60, I believe it was, that they used, Big Mother, that they used off the carriers to do some. They made some rescues up there as well. But anyway, that was that one. And then the other one that I think is really interesting was Lynn Aikman. Lynn Aikman was Valent 04 Alpha. And the reason that one was interesting, in fact, we have Ron Smith, not Ron Smith, guy that's written all the books. Oh, gosh. Fact.
I know you're talking about.
Anyhow, he's done almost all the work on upgrading Dale Stovall's Silver Star to a Medal of Honor. Darrell Whitcomb.
Darrell Whitcomb, yes.
So this rescue, what started off with Hook Byron was the first on-scene commander, and they had picked up one of the guys. There were 4 F-4s shot down, 8 people on the ground. And we had done some rescue. We were down to four more people left out there. One of them was, they had told him to stay put. Can't think of his name again, but anyhow, he thought they told him to come on out. He came out and they captured him. They had not gotten us there enough to rescue him yet. So when we finally brought the helicopter in to rescue Lynn Aikman, he was in the hover. He lowered the penetrator.
That'd be Dale Stovall was in the hover, correct?
No, this was the first helicopter.
Okay.
He was in the hover. He was way above the ground. His head is penetrated out as far as it would go. In fact, it was so far down, the air was in a valley. He was actually chopping off the tops of some trees with his blades to get low enough where we could get him on the ground. Anyhow, he went over to Lynn. Of course, like I say, Lynn bailed out at 600 knots, dislocated shoulders, dislocated his knee, blinded him from the. He's hanging in a tree. Didn't know he's only a few feet from the ground. Couldn't see. So when Chuck McGrath got out, PJ got out on the ground, went over, started working with him. Because we were in a valley, we had guys shooting down at the helicopter from all sides and blew out his hydraulic system. He couldn't retract a penetrator, so he had to cut the cable, cut it, leave it. And then Dale Stovall escorted him out. He says, "Are you okay?" Because he says, "Yeah, we're okay. Go ahead. You try to make your rescue." Dale says, "Okay." Well, they talked about it, and he says, "Okay, we're going back in again." So here he is. He's been out there, seen his wingman get shot up, and decides, "Okay, we're checked with his guys. Yeah, we're going back in." So he goes in. He's in a hover, and he's got guys shooting at him from up here. He's got shooting at him from up here, and shooting at him from back here. And of course, he's shooting at from this side. They're shooting at from this side as well. Well, that's the guy that's operating the winch, so he can't operate his gun. The only defense they've got is they've got defense from here and defense from here. There's no defense for the helicopter from back here. The co-pilot is calling out. He was calling out. He says, "I see so and so shooting up here. I could roll in. I could actually see the bullets hitting this guy." That's how close we were in that area right there. And so Dale's having to hover because he's got the penetrator down there. And McGrath is by this time is trying to emergency care on this guy, dragging him over to where we can get out. And he's getting ground fire. We knew we couldn't leave. If we left, we'd nobody be there next day because there was that many people coming in there. And that's one of the reasons that Daryl and I were trying to get that upgraded to Medal of Honor, because the courage it took to hover. I mean, you're sitting still. You're not like us, we're moving around. He's sitting still, taking all this fire. And he knows he can't leave. So anyhow, we finally gets him down, gets him on penetrator. Just as he's getting him up into the aircraft, he takes another round in the door through his ankle.
And that's the wound.
That's Lynn Aikman.
Yeah.
But the beauty of it is, Lynn Aikman, Daryl Stovall, Chuck McGrath, myself, were in that same helicopter at Wright-Patterson at the museum, in the back of that helicopter. It was just what a moment that was.
That was this summer in June, wasn't it?
Yeah.
At the dedication.
Dedication of that. Dedication of the search and rescue effort. It was a whole diorama of all the search and rescue aircraft.
That was an incredible experience there.
It was, especially for Dale. I think it meant a lot to him because he and I were in almost every rescue that was made for a long time there. Anyhow, another interesting little bit about that was the fact that when you think about what had to all the things that had to happen to bring that together where it would work, somebody other than us fighter pilots were watching over us and taking care of us. It's unbelievable that all that was able to come together and get him out of there. 6 operations later, and about 4 months later, I got a call about 2:00 in the morning from Lynn Aikman. He says, "I just want to say thank you." He says, "There's no way I'd be here if it weren't for what you guys did on that day." And that's the first time I've seen him, but I didn't see him then. Of course, it all went someplace else. But I had never met him personally before that. Now, he and Dale had met at the Pentagon and gotten together. He and Dale and...
So this summer was the first time you met somebody that you had rescued 50 plus years ago?
Yeah. Well, that other than Clyde Smith.
Yeah.
I've been in touch with Clyde Smith almost ever since. That was Bengal 505.
That had to be quite the moment.
It was.
Especially being in that aircraft again.
It's patched up, of course, a lot since then because it had a lot of holes in it. But, it's amazing how close you feel. And this is why we've got this organization called Vietnam Veterans of America. We've got a unit in Jackson, Tennessee. Jackson, Tennessee. We meet once a month. And I'd tell those guys, I said, you just don't realize how fortunate you are to even be here, because some of them had some really serious experiences. One of them happened to be on a that twin engine aircraft, had two jet engines.
It was C-123, wasn't it?
It was C-123. It was a modified version of it.
Mm-hmm.
They used that to drop a lot of the Agent Orange. They had this one guy was on a mission. His boss came in and said, "Hey, you're gonna go so and so." He says, "Get some civilian clothes and don't take any ID with you." That's when we weren't in Laos. Well, that's where he was going, was Laos. Well, the airplane got shot down and crashed, and of course he was bathed in Agent Orange, because they had big bladders with that in there to dispense it. Anyhow, he survived, and he's one of the guys in our Vietnam Veterans of America unit that's there. And I told these guys, I said, you just don't realize what a kind of a brotherhood you have all been in combat at the same place, defending the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I think that's one of the things that we have to remember on this, because we've got Veterans Day coming up Saturday, that there's a lot of folks that have done just that all over the world, not just us, Vietnam, but also all these other wars. The thing of it is things that I like about the past is that we won all those wars up to Vietnam, actually to Korea. We won the wars because the enemy surrendered. Well, ever since that, we've just kind of backed out and left it. It's sad, but that's what's happened, yeah.
I think Daryl Whitcomb said it best in Dayton, Ohio, when he was giving his presentation. He said, the reason we lost the Vietnam War is we fought in the wrong country. We should have been fighting in Laos,
yeah,
where the main force was. He said, we would have lost a lot of people. He said, but it wouldn't have been what we ran through with this protracted air war.
Well, my take on it is we lose wars. We don't lose wars. We just don't win them. The problem is that we have people at the top making the decisions that don't realize we're trading men and women, of truce. We're not winning wars anymore. This is the beauty of World War I and World War II. We went into those wars, okay, we've got to win because it might affect us in the United States. Even though we're fighting wars in other countries, it would affect us eventually. We need to understand that no matter where we go to war, it's going to affect us, because look what's happened now. Because we have dilly-dallied around, instead of defeating the enemy is still there, and it's getting stronger. Every war, they get stronger. Mm-hmm. We essentially have empowered the enemy to be able to defeat us. And right now, we probably have so many communists and so many Muslims in the United States of America that if they decide to all attack at one time, it's going to be up to a whole lot of us old folks to defend ourselves. And I think that's the message that I try to get across to people. We have to understand that these people are going to fight until they win. They're not going to quit like we do.
They have a different mindset.
A totally different mindset.
Yeah.
Their idea is we will fight until we win.
They're playing the long game where we're playing the short game.
Yeah. We think that we can just go someplace and fight for a while and we'll scare them off. I think Johnson said it best. He says, I've got a Secretary of War, McNamara, who's in charge of this war. We actually briefed Johnson shortly after the war started in Vietnam. They had a lot of very high-ranking men from the Army, Navy, and Air Force and Marines. And he essentially threw him out of the office and said, throughout the briefing, he says, I know how to win this war. We've got somebody that can win this war for us. And their idea was graduated pressure until they give up. Well, you're fighting Orient and you're fighting the Muslims, and neither one of those are going to give up. They never give up. The Muslim way of thinking is we will outlast them. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with the Orientals, because the Orientals have so many people, they know that they're going to outlast everybody else.
Yep. Douglas MacArthur said it when he said, do not get involved in a land war in Asia, because he knew if you got caught in there, they had more people and they would just bleed you until you had to leave.
Well, they can, I've often said it, they could send a regiment, actually a regiment more than even an army, and they would never run out of people. They've got so many people that no matter how many you killed, and this is what a lot of the times Forward Air Controller, I was helping at special forces camps. And they would put the first group of people, and they would just throw themselves on the wire, because we always surrounded camps with concertina wire. Mm-hmm. They would just throw themselves on the wire, and the other people would come right across them. In other words, they were sacrificing those bodies to get a way in. And this is essentially what the Muslims are doing now. Yep. This is what they did against Israel recently. Mm-hmm. The sad part about it is we're now sending our troops over there and telling the Israelis, you can't counterattack. You can't kill them just because they killed you. Someone asked me a question that says, what's the difference between murder and murdering somebody and killing somebody? I said, well, when you kill somebody, you're killing the enemy. But when you murder somebody, you're murdering somebody just because that's your way of life. This is the Muslim way of life. They don't care. Women, children, ripping babies out of the womb, everything. They just do not care what it is, because they want to kill all Christians and Jews. Well, the Hitler and that group are almost the same thing. They wanted to wipe out a whole sect of people. We have to understand that if we're going to ever be able to live free and, well, let's say have freedom and able to do what we want to do in the United States, we have to change our way of thinking so that we realize that if we're going to fight an enemy that wants to eliminate us, we have to eliminate them. Uh-huh.
I tell you what, Jim, it is always amazing to hear you speak. Is there anything else you wanted to chat about while we're in here?
I think what I feel the most important about in our country right now is we have to understand that we have gotten away from God. And we now feel like being able to do what we want to do. And you've got to remember, Satan is always fighting God. Satan inspires these youngsters to do what they do. You can't just do what you want to do in life. You have to understand how we were created. We are created as an image of God himself. And if you try to change that, you're going against God's will. And this is what's happened to our country right now. We have people, they do what they want to do. It's not what's the right thing to do, it's what they want to do. It's what makes them feel good. And I think we've got people who run our companies that are doing the same thing. Money is more important to them than human life almost. We've got to get back to good old basics. I talk to our guys all the time. I said, if we could just get our military back like it was when I was in the military, we'd be so much better off, because we didn't tolerate deviant sexual behavior. Now, yeah, there were a lot of fighter pilots and everything else that did some really bad things, but they still always believed in our country, believed in our way of life. I don't think we have that anymore. I would be very concerned if we had to go to war right now, because someone was telling me, I just gave a speech at a dining in a couple days ago, and this Marine sergeant came up to me and he says, "Colonel, you're not going to realize what's going on in our country right now." He says, "We got called together. We had a group of people who were not white over here." He was one of them. He was very, very light-colored black man. And the white people over here. He says this group over here had these cards and had to read off on these cards. It's, "Why are you persecuting us? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that?" And over on this side, the white people had their cards, and they said, "Well, we're so sorry. We don't mean to do that. We are dividing our country." At the top, this was a lieutenant colonel who was a brigade, somebody in the brigade. This is an active duty Marines. We're not talking about people doing things out on the street. We're talking about our military. And this is what makes me so sad, because I remember we would do anything. They said I had a death wish when I was flying, because whatever it took, I was going to do to rescue somebody, because that life meant so much to me. And we did some probably stupid things, but we did it because we wanted to make sure we were successful. I don't think we have that in our military anymore. I don't think we've got people who would sacrifice everything to rescue somebody else, to take care of somebody else. We got some, but the leadership at the top are not like that, and the ones coming in from the bottom are not like that. So my thought I would leave with people is we need to somehow remember that we're all created in God's image, that we can't change that. No matter how hard we try, we can't change that. I read somewhere where every cell of your body is programmed male or female when you're born, and no matter what you do, you're not going to change that. Mm-hmm. You're going to always be a male or a female, because God only created two. Mm-hmm. He didn't create more than that. And when we try to make changes to make us do what we want, we're going against God's will, and we're following Satan's path. I don't want to get into that about it, but I just feel like we need to understand where we come from. And that's what we used to have. When I grew up, we had family. Yep. That was more important than almost anything else. So I would leave with whatever we have in our country. Somehow we have to understand that part, that we are created in God's image, and we need to understand it and keep that.
I think that's a beautiful way to close, sir. Thank you so much for taking the time to be in here with me.
You're welcome.
And I know I've been after you for years. I really appreciate it, sir.
That's no problem.
Thank you.